Paris once tried to stop this tower from being built. Artists called it a disaster. Politicians wanted it torn down. It was meant to stand for only 20 years and then disappear forever. But today, it's the most famous landmark on Earth. So how did a structure once hated by its own city become the ultimate symbol of romance and dreams? Before we dive into the story, make sure you subscribe to Sky Aurora so you don't miss more cinematic history like this. Picture Paris in the late 1800s, when the city still moved to the rhythm of horses and human footsteps. Carriages rolled across cobblestone streets, their wheels clicking in steady echoes that bounced off stone facades. Gas lamps flickered softly at dusk, casting a golden haze over narrow alleys and wide boulevards alike. Along the Seine, booksellers arranged their volumes carefully while painters searched for the perfect light. Inside smoky cafes, writers and philosophers debated art, politics, and the future of France with dramatic gestures and raised voices. Paris was elegance. Paris was tradition. Paris was art carved in stone. And right in the middle of this refined world, an idea was about to rise, not sculpted from marble, not inspired by ancient Greece or Rome, but forged from iron. In 1889, France was preparing for something monumental, the Exposition Universelle, a world's fair organized to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the French Revolution. A century earlier, the revolution had reshaped a nation and shaken Europe. Now, the French government wanted to mark that milestone with a powerful statement to the world. This would not be just another exhibition of art and industry. It would be a declaration that France remained a leader of innovation, science, and modern thought. Officials announced a competition. They wanted a structure unlike anything ever seen before, something bold enough to dominate the skyline, and daring enough to symbolize a new century. It had to be modern, it had to be unforgettable, and it had to stand at the entrance of the fairgrounds as a gateway to the future. Among the many proposals submitted, one stood out. It was radical. A 300-meter tower made entirely of iron. No heavy stone walls, no classical statues, just a skeletal lattice of metal, rising higher than any structure humans had ever built. The proposal came from the company of Gustave Eiffel, whose name would soon become inseparable from the tower itself. Though the initial design was created by his engineers Maurice Koechlin and Émile Nouguier, Eiffel embraced the concept, refined it, and defended it with confidence. He saw beyond its strange outline. He believed iron could be beautiful. He believed engineering could be art. When the design was officially selected in 1886, it was meant to represent progress, the triumph of science and industry. But the reaction from many Parisians was immediate and fierce. Before a single iron beam was assembled, the criticism began. Prominent writers, artists, and architects signed a public protest published in a major newspaper. They described the proposed tower as a gigantic black smokestack looming over the city. Some called it a monstrous intrusion that would crush the delicate beauty of Paris. They feared it would dominate the skyline and overshadow beloved landmarks like Notre Dame Cathedral and the classical domes and arches that defined the city's identity. To them, Paris was a masterpiece of harmony, carefully proportioned, romantic, timeless. An iron tower, raw and industrial, felt like a factory chimney planted in the heart of art itself. They could not imagine it becoming beautiful. Construction began in January 1887 on the Champ de Mars. Massive iron pieces were prefabricated in factories, each precisely calculated. More than 18,000 individual parts would eventually be assembled, connected by around 2.5 million rivets. Workers climbed high above the ground on wooden scaffolding, guided by mathematical precision and remarkable discipline. For many Parisians watching from below, the structure looked skeletal and awkward as it slowly grew taller. It did not resemble a cathedral rising toward heaven. It looked mechanical, almost alien. And yet, there was something mesmerizing about its growth. Each month, it stretched higher. By 1888, its iron legs curved inward as they climbed, forming a shape carefully designed to resist wind pressure. This was not random metal. Every angle had been calculated. Every curve served a structural purpose. The tower was not just tall, it was scientifically elegant. Still, the complaints did not stop. Newspapers mocked it. Critics predicted it would collapse. Some insisted it would permanently scar the city's beauty. And perhaps the most dramatic truth of all, the tower was never meant to stay forever. According to its agreement with the city, it was granted a permit for only 20 years. After that, it would be dismantled. Imagine that. What would become the world's most recognized landmark was at the beginning temporary. By March 1889, after just over 2 years of construction, the tower was complete. It stood 300 meters tall, making it the tallest man-made structure on Earth at the time, surpassing even the Washington Monument. When the Exposition Universelle opened in May 1889, visitors from around the world arrived in awe. Some came out of curiosity, others came out of disbelief. Many simply wanted to see if this iron giant was as outrageous as critics claimed. Then, something unexpected happened. They climbed it. Nearly 2 million people ascended the tower during the fair. From its platforms, Paris unfolded in a way no one had ever seen before. The Seine curved like a silver ribbon. The grand boulevards stretched outward in geometric perfection. The rooftops shimmered beneath the sun. From above, the city did not look ruined. It looked magnificent. The Iron Tower did not destroy Paris. It reframed it. It offered a new perspective, literally and symbolically. It proved that modern engineering could stand beside classical architecture without erasing it. Instead of crushing the skyline, it crowned it. And slowly, opinions began to shift. The same structure once described as monstrous began attracting admiration. Visitors spoke of its daring design. Engineers praised its precision. Even some critics softened their stance, recognizing that the tower represented something undeniably bold: courage. The courage to build higher than ever before. The courage to experiment. The courage to challenge tradition. Today, the Eiffel Tower is more than iron and rivets. It is a symbol recognized across continents. It appears in films, paintings, postcards, and countless photographs. Couples propose beneath it. Fireworks illuminated on national celebrations. It has become shorthand for Paris itself. But in those early days, nothing about its future was guaranteed. It was controversial, it was temporary, it was doubted. And perhaps that's what makes its story so powerful. Because before it became a global icon of romance and beauty, it was simply an idea, fragile, criticized, and uncertain. The tower that almost never existed now defines an entire city. And maybe the most fascinating part of its history is this: the iron never changed, only people did. The man whose name would eventually define the most recognizable structure in Paris was Gustave Eiffel. Today, it is impossible to separate the tower from his identity. His surname is spoken millions of times each day by tourists, historians, and dreamers alike. Yet the story behind that name is more layered than most people realize. Interestingly, the original concept of the tower did not begin as his personal vision sketched alone at a desk. It started inside his engineering company, where two talented engineers, Maurice Coquelin and Émile Nouguier, were already thinking beyond conventional limits. France was preparing for the Exposition Universelle of 1889, and there was growing discussion about creating a structure that would dominate the skyline. Coquelin and Nouguier imagined something radical, a 300-meter iron tower, taller than any building humanity had ever constructed. At first glance, the idea seemed almost absurd. 300 meters of iron rising into the Parisian sky? In an era when stone and masonry defined monumental architecture, this proposal looked more like an industrial experiment than a national symbol. Their early sketches showed a tall lattice structure, wide at the base and narrowing as it rose. It was mathematical, skeletal, unapologetically modern. When they presented the concept internally, it did not immediately receive universal excitement. Even within engineering circles, such ambition carried enormous risk. The technical challenges alone were staggering. Wind resistance, weight distribution, material strength, everything would have to be calculated with extraordinary precision. Failure would not just be embarrassing, it would be catastrophic. But when Gustave Eiffel examined the proposal more closely, he did not see absurdity, he saw potential. Eiffel was already a respected civil engineer long before the tower. He had built bridges across Europe, using iron in ways that demonstrated both strength and elegance. He understood how metal could behave under pressure, how curved forms could distribute force efficiently, and how precision could transform raw material into something almost graceful. Where others saw an industrial skeleton, he saw a statement. To him, this was not merely a tall structure meant to shock the public. It was an opportunity to prove something much bigger. It was proof that engineering could be art, that mathematics, often seen as cold and rigid, could generate beauty when applied with vision, that modern industry did not have to hide in factories on the outskirts of cities. It could stand proudly in the very heart of classical Paris. Paris at the time was deeply attached to its architectural identity. The city's landmarks were steeped in history: Gothic cathedrals, grand palaces, symmetrical boulevards. Introducing a giant iron tower into that refined landscape felt to many like placing a machine in a museum. Eiffel understood this tension, but instead of retreating from it, he leaned into it. He purchased the rights to the design and refined it further. Adjustments were made to improve its visual proportions. Decorative arches were added between the four legs to give it more of a harmonious relationship with the surrounding space. The curvature of the tower's profile was carefully calculated, not randomly drawn. Every line served a structural purpose, designed specifically to resist wind pressure efficiently. The shape itself became a mathematical response to natural forces. Eiffel did not treat the tower as a reckless gamble. He approached it as a scientific challenge grounded in reason. He presented detailed studies demonstrating that the structure would be stable, safe, and resilient. He argued that iron, far from being ugly, could be elegant precisely because it allowed light to pass through it. Unlike massive stone buildings that blocked the sky, this lattice framework would appear almost transparent from a distance. Still, approval was not easy. Many artists and intellectuals publicly condemned the idea. They feared that a towering iron structure would permanently scar the Parisian skyline. Newspapers criticized it before construction even began. Yet, Eiffel stood firm. He gave interviews, defended the design in writing, and emphasized the scientific achievements it would represent. For him, this tower symbolized progress, the courage to step into a new century with confidence rather than nostalgia. His determination was not fueled by ego alone. It was rooted in belief.
He believed that societies move forward when they dare to innovate. He believed that beauty evolves. He believed that tradition and modernity could coexist, not compete. By the time the tower neared completion in 1889, it had already become a topic of global conversation. Whether people loved it or hated it, they could not ignore it. And that alone signaled something extraordinary. Gustav Eiffel did not simply build a structure of iron. He championed a philosophy that science and art are not opposites, but partners, that equations can shape elegance, that courage can transform controversy into legacy. When construction officially began in 1887, it marked more than the start of a building project. It marked the moment when a belief turned into action. A vision that began as lines on paper was now rising into the sky. And in that ascent, one engineer's faith in mathematics, metal, and modernity was about to change the identity of an entire city.
The backlash was fierce, and it was loud. Long before the tower pierced the Parisian sky, it pierced the pride of the city's artistic elite. As the iron framework began to rise from the Champ de Mars in 1887, anxiety spread through salons, studios, and literary circles. Paris was not just a capital city, it was a symbol of refinement. Its skyline was a composition carefully painted over centuries. Gothic spires, domes, symmetrical boulevards, and harmonious facades. Into that elegant composition, an iron skeleton was now climbing, bolt by bolt, meter by meter. A group of prominent artists and intellectuals decided they could not remain silent. Among them were respected writers, architects, composers, and painters, figures whose opinions carried enormous cultural weight. They drafted and signed an open letter that was published in a major newspaper, protesting the construction of what they believed would be a disaster for the city's beauty. Their words were sharp, almost theatrical in their outrage. They described the rising structure as a gigantic black smokestack. Others mocked it as a truly tragic street lamp. To them, this was not innovation, it was vandalism. They warned that the tower would dominate Paris like a factory chimney, crushing the delicate aesthetic balance that had made the city world famous. They argued that Paris was the city of Notre Dame Cathedral, of the Louvre, of classical proportions and romantic silhouettes. They feared that once the Iron Tower stood complete, it would dwarf these historic monuments, reducing centuries of art and architecture to mere background scenery. The skyline, they insisted, would never recover. To these critics, the structure symbolized industrial ugliness. The late 19th century was an era of rapid industrialization. Factories were expanding, railways were spreading, and smokestacks were becoming common sights in growing cities. Many artists associated iron frameworks with machinery, noise, and pollution, not with grace or beauty. The tower's exposed lattice design looked mechanical, almost skeletal. It did not hide its structure behind ornamentation. It did not pretend to be anything other than engineered metal. And that honesty unsettled them. They believed beauty should be carved, sculpted, decorated. Iron, in their minds, belonged to bridges and train stations, not to the heart of Paris. They saw the tower as a threat to tradition, an aggressive symbol of modern industry intruding into a city built on history. But while protests filled newspapers and conversations grew heated in cafes, construction did not stop. On the Champ de Mars, the sound of hammering continued. Iron parts arrived from factories, each piece precisely manufactured according to detailed engineering drawings. Approximately 2.5 million rivets would eventually form the structure. Each one had been calculated with meticulous care, ensuring that when assembled, the tower would stand firm against gravity and wind. Approximately 2.5 million rivets would hold those pieces together. Workers heated rivets until they glowed red, inserted them into pre-drilled holes, and hammered them into place before the metal cooled and contracted, locking the joints tightly.
The process was repetitive, demanding, and physically exhausting, yet it was carried out with remarkable coordination. Hundreds of workers labored at dizzying heights. Temporary wooden scaffolding surrounded the growing structure, and cranes lifted heavy iron segments into position. As the legs of the tower began to curve inward, observers could finally see that this was not a random assembly of metal. Its silhouette had intention. Its arc followed mathematical logic, designed to resist wind pressure efficiently. Safety, surprisingly, became one of the project's quiet achievements. Under the leadership of Gustave Eiffel, strict precautions were implemented. Movable guardrails and protective screens were installed, reducing the risk of falls. For a construction project of such height and complexity in the 1880s, this level of safety planning was unusual. Industrial projects of that era often resulted in numerous fatalities. Yet, during the entire construction process of the tower, only one worker died, and that accident didn't even occur during standard working hours on the main structure. For the 19th century, this was an extraordinary safety record. It demonstrated not only engineering brilliance, but organizational discipline. Meanwhile, the tower kept rising. As it passed the height of surrounding buildings, it became impossible to ignore. From nearly every district in Paris, residents could see the iron framework climbing higher each week. Some watched in frustration, convinced they were witnessing the disfigurement of their beloved city. Others watched in fascination, curious about how such an ambitious project would end. By early 1889, the structure neared completion, its 4 massive legs anchored firmly to the ground. The first and second platforms were in place, offering panoramic views that no Parisian had ever experienced before. Finally, in March 1889, the tower was complete. It stood 300 meters tall. At that moment, it became the tallest man-made structure in the world, surpassing the Washington Monument in the United States. No cathedral, no palace, no ancient monument reached such height. It was not merely a building, it was a declaration of human capability. Paris could no longer pretend it was temporary scaffolding. It was finished, it was real, and it dominated the skyline. For critics, this was the moment of reckoning. The tragic street lamp now towered above everything they cherished. It did not collapse, it did not sway dramatically in the wind as some had predicted. It stood firm, steady, almost calm in its presence. The irony was impossible to ignore. The structure they feared would destroy Paris was now drawing global attention. Journalists from other countries reported on its audacity. Visitors preparing for the Exposition Universelle spoke about climbing it. The tower, whether loved or hated, had already become the center of conversation. Paris had resisted it. Paris had mocked it. But Paris could no longer ignore it. The iron skeleton that once seemed like industrial arrogance was now the tallest symbol of modern ambition on Earth, and as its shadow stretched across the Champ de Mars, one truth became undeniable. Controversy had not stopped progress. If anything, it had made the tower impossible to forget. In the spring of 1889, Paris felt like the center of the universe. Flags fluttered along wide boulevards, orchestras played in exhibition halls, and crowds from across the globe poured into the city for the Exposition Universelle. Nations had built elaborate pavilions to showcase their inventions, cultures, and ambitions. Electricity illuminated displays that seemed almost magical. Machines hummed. New technologies promised to reshape daily life. The air itself felt charged with expectation. And above it all, rising higher than anything Europe had ever seen, stood the Iron Tower. At 300 meters tall, it pierced the sky with unapologetic confidence. It was visible from nearly every corner of the city, a vertical line against the soft, horizontal spread of Parisian rooftops. Compared to cathedrals and monuments that once defined grandeur, this structure seemed almost otherworldly. It did not resemble the past. It pointed toward the future. When the exposition officially opened on May 6, 1889, visitors were stunned. Many had read about the controversy, many had seen illustrations in newspapers, but nothing prepared them for the scale of it in person. Standing at its base, people craned their necks until their hats nearly fell off. The four enormous iron legs arched gracefully before converging upward, forming a lattice so intricate it seemed almost delicate despite its immense weight. What critics had labeled monstrous now inspired awe. The tower did not feel heavy or oppressive. Light passed through its open framework, and sunlight shimmered along its riveted beams. Instead of blocking the sky, it framed it. The structure's curved profile, calculated to resist wind pressure, gave it a surprising elegance. It was industrial, yes, but it was also poetic in its geometry. Lines formed almost immediately. Visitors wanted to climb it. At that time, elevators were still a relatively novel technology, especially in a structure of such unprecedented height. Some ascended by lift to the first and second platforms, while others climbed hundreds of steps on foot, determined to reach the top. The journey upward became an experience in itself. The city shrinking below, the sounds of the fair blending into distant murmurs. Nearly 2 million visitors would ascend the tower during the exposition. For many, it was not simply a sightseeing activity, it was participation in history. They were climbing the tallest structure humanity had ever built. From the first platform, the fairgrounds unfolded in vibrant detail. Pavilions from different nations displayed architecture ranging from ornate oriental designs to sleek industrial halls. The River Seine curved gently nearby, reflecting sunlight like a ribbon of silver. But it was from the higher platforms that the true transformation revealed itself. From the top, Paris looked different. The city's famous boulevards, carefully redesigned earlier in the century, radiated outward in elegant lines. The domes and spires that critics feared would be overshadowed were still visible, proud and distinct. The rooftops formed a sea of soft gray and beige, stretching toward the horizon. Far from being ruined, Paris appeared harmonious, almost like a carefully composed painting. The tower did not destroy the skyline, it redefined perspective. Standing above the city gave visitors a new relationship with it. Instead of wandering through streets at ground level, they could now see the entire layout at once. The city revealed its geometry, its rhythm, its scale. What once felt overwhelming from below felt organized and majestic from above. This shift in perspective quietly changed public opinion. The same structure described in open letters as a gigantic black smokestack now felt like a balcony to the world. Tourists spoke of its magnificence. Foreign journalists praised France's audacity and engineering skill. Engineers admired the precision required to assemble more than 18,000 iron components with such accuracy. Even some Parisians who had opposed it found themselves reluctantly impressed. There was something undeniably triumphant about it. The tower was not simply tall, it was stable. It did not sway dramatically in the wind as skeptics had predicted. It stood firm, resilient, almost serene in its height. Its very presence communicated confidence. The exposition itself celebrated progress, electricity, machinery, science, and global exchange, and the tower became its ultimate symbol. It was visible from nearly every corner of the fair, acting as a compass point for visitors navigating the sprawling grounds. If someone became lost among the exhibits, they only had to look up to find their direction. In that sense, the tower did more than dominate the skyline, it unified the event. As days passed and crowds continued to climb, the atmosphere shifted from skepticism to celebration. Postcards featuring the tower were sold as souvenirs. Artists sketched its silhouette. Photographers captured images from its platforms. It was no longer just a controversial experiment, it was the face of the exposition. And beyond its original 300-meter height, the structure would later grow even taller, eventually reaching 324 meters with the addition of antennas. But even at its initial height, it had already shattered records and expectations. No European monument came close to matching its vertical ambition. What makes that moment so powerful is not simply the scale of the achievement, but the reversal of perception. What critics called industrial ugliness, tourists now called magnificent. What was feared as a permanent scar became a symbol of national pride. The iron lattice, once dismissed as skeletal, now seemed almost graceful against the sky. The day the exposition opened was, in many ways, the day the world looked up, literally and figuratively. Humanity had pushed its architectural limits higher than ever before. France had demonstrated that modern engineering could stand alongside classical beauty without diminishing it. And millions of visitors experienced a perspective that reshaped how they saw cities themselves. Paris was not overshadowed. It was transformed. From above, the city did not appear conquered by iron, it appeared crowned by it. The tower did not erase history, it added a new chapter to it. It proved that innovation could coexist with tradition, that boldness could become beauty, and that sometimes the most controversial ideas only need altitude to be understood. On that day in 1889, as crowds gathered and the World Fair buzzed with energy, the Iron Tower accomplished something greater than height. It shifted imagination. It invited people to see differently. And once they had seen Paris from the sky, they could never see it the same way again.
There is a detail in the story of the Eiffel Tower that often surprises people, even those who believe they know its history well. For all its grandeur, for all the millions of photographs taken beneath it, for all the proposals, fireworks, and celebrations it has witnessed, the tower was never meant to stay. It was born temporary. When the project was approved in the 1880s, the agreement between the city of Paris and Gustave Eiffel was clear. The tower would stand for 20 years. After that, ownership would revert fully to the city, and it could be dismantled. In other words, by 1909, this giant of iron that had captured the world's attention was scheduled to disappear. Imagine that for a moment. The skyline we now consider inseparable from Paris was once on borrowed time. In 1889, during the Exposition Universelle, few people worried about the year 1909. The tower was new, thrilling, controversial, and triumphant. It had served its purpose as the centerpiece of the World Fair, drawing nearly 2 million visitors who climbed its platforms. It had proven that modern engineering could rise higher than ever before. But fairs end, crowds go home, excitement fades, and cities move on. As the years passed after the exposition, Paris returned to its rhythms. The fairgrounds were dismantled, temporary pavilions vanished, yet the Iron Tower remained, standing above the Champ de Mars like a question mark in metal. Some Parisians had grown used to it, others still disliked it, but the contract remained unchanged. 20 years. By the late 1900s and early 1900s, conversations about its future grew more serious. Maintenance of such a structure was not insignificant. The iron required periodic painting to prevent rust. The elevators demanded upkeep. Without a clear long-term purpose, critics argued that dismantling it would be practical and financially sensible. After all, it had been built as a temporary monument for a specific event. That event was over. There was also the matter of taste. While public opinion had softened since the fierce protests of the 1880s, not everyone had become a devoted admirer. Some still believed the tower disrupted the classical harmony of Paris. If it disappeared, they reasoned, the skyline would return to its earlier purity. And so, as 1909 approached, the possibility of demolition was not theoretical. It was written into the agreement from the beginning. The Iron Giant, once the tallest structure on Earth, faced the real prospect of being taken apart piece by piece, its 18,000 components dismantled, its 2.5 million rivets removed, its silhouette erased from memory.
It is strange to imagine workers reversing the very process that had once symbolized progress. Instead of climbing higher, they would descend. Instead of assembling, they would disassemble. The structure that had once represented modern ambition would become scrap metal. Yet something had changed during those 20 years. Quietly, almost subtly, the tower had begun to serve a purpose beyond spectacle. Science was advancing rapidly at the turn of the 20th century. One of the most transformative developments of the era was wireless telegraphy. Communication, once limited by physical wires, was beginning to travel invisibly through the air. Signals could be transmitted over long distances without cables, carried by electromagnetic waves. And height mattered. The taller the antenna, the farther signals could travel. The Eiffel Tower, already the highest structure in Europe, suddenly possessed an unexpected advantage. What had once been criticized as excessive height became scientifically valuable. Experiments began to take place. Antennas were installed at the top of the tower. Researchers tested radio transmissions. The results were promising. Signals sent from the tower reached distant locations with surprising clarity. The iron framework, once dismissed as ugly industrialism, now functioned as a powerful scientific instrument. The French military took notice. In an era when rapid communication could determine the outcome of conflicts, a high radio transmission point in the center of the capital was strategically invaluable. The tower became a wireless telegraph station. It was used to intercept messages and coordinate communications. Its height provided an advantage no other structure in Paris could match. Suddenly, the tower was not merely decorative, it was useful. That usefulness changed everything. Demolishing it in 1909 would not just remove a controversial monument, it would eliminate a crucial communication asset. The tower's practical value began to outweigh lingering aesthetic objections. Science had given it a new identity. Instead of being remembered as a temporary exhibition structure, it became an essential part of France's technological infrastructure. The iron lattice that once symbolized industrial intrusion now symbolized innovation and strategic foresight. In a quiet but decisive shift, plans to dismantle it were abandoned. There was no dramatic public ceremony announcing its salvation, no thunderous declaration proclaiming it permanent. The decision unfolded gradually, almost pragmatically. The tower stayed because it worked. This transformation is deeply ironic. The structure that critics once condemned as useless and ugly survived not because it was beautiful, but because it proved functional. Beauty alone might not have saved it. Romance certainly had not yet attached itself to its silhouette in the way it would later. It was science, precise, practical, and undeniable, that secured its future. And once the immediate threat of demolition passed, time did the rest. As decades rolled forward, the tower's presence became normalized. New generations grew up with it as part of the skyline. What had once been controversial became familiar. What had once been temporary became permanent through utility. Looking back, the suspense of those early 20th century years feels almost unreal. The idea that the Eiffel Tower could have vanished in 1909 seems impossible now. Yet it was not only possible, it was planned. Its survival was not guaranteed by popularity, it was secured by relevance. Because of science, because iron, when lifted high enough, could carry invisible signals across distances. Because progress sometimes depends not on admiration, but on application. The tower that shocked the world in 1889 stood at the edge of extinction 20 years later, and instead of fading into history as a bold but brief experiment, it adapted. In doing so, it quietly ensured that Paris would never again be imagined without it.
At the dawn of the 20th century, the world was learning how to speak through the air.
For centuries, communication over long distances had depended on physical connections, letters carried by horse or ship, telegraph wires stretched across landscapes, cables laid carefully along the ocean floor. Messages moved, but they were tied to something solid. Then came wireless telegraphy, a revolutionary idea that signals could travel invisibly through space without wires. It sounded almost magical at first, but it was grounded in serious scientific discovery. And high above Paris, the Eiffel Tower was about to find a new purpose. When it was completed in 1889, the tower had already proven its engineering brilliance. But by the early 1900s, as its initial 20-year concession period approached its end, it faced an uncertain future. Many still remembered that it had been intended as a temporary structure for the Exposition Universelle. Without a compelling reason to keep it, dismantling remained a realistic possibility. Wireless communication changed that calculation. Scientists quickly realized that height was a crucial advantage for radio transmission. The higher the antenna, the farther the signal could travel. Elevation reduced interference from buildings and terrain, allowing electromagnetic waves to spread more efficiently across long distances. At 300 meters tall, the Eiffel Tower was not just tall, it was unmatched in Europe. Experiments began. Antennas were installed at the summit, transmission tests were conducted from its platforms. Engineers measured signal range and clarity. The results were impressive. Messages sent from the tower traveled far beyond Paris, reaching distant parts of France and even crossing borders. What had once been criticized as an excessive and unnecessary height suddenly became its greatest strength. The French military recognized the strategic value almost immediately. In an era when global tensions were rising and alliances shifting, rapid communication was becoming essential to national security. Wireless telegraphy allowed armies to send orders quickly, coordinate movements, and gather intelligence. A central transmission point in the capital, one that towered over every other structure, was an extraordinary asset. The tower became a wireless telegraph station. Instead of serving merely as a viewing platform for tourists, it now transmitted signals through the sky. Operators worked with early radio equipment, adjusting frequencies and monitoring signals. The iron lattice that had once been mocked as industrial ugliness now supported antennas that connected France to the wider world. By 1909, when the tower's original permit was set to expire, its practical value was undeniable. Dismantling it would mean losing a powerful communication hub. Quietly and pragmatically, the idea of demolition faded. There was no dramatic announcement. There was simply no longer a reason to remove it. The tower stayed. Not because everyone suddenly agreed it was beautiful, but because it was useful. Its importance became even clearer during World War I. When war erupted in 1914, communication speed and reliability could determine success or failure on the battlefield. The Eiffel Tower's radio station played a significant role in intercepting enemy transmissions and relaying French military messages. Its height allowed signals to travel farther and more clearly than many ground-based installations. One of its most notable contributions came during the early days of the war. Radio intercepts from the tower helped French forces detect and respond to German communications, aiding in defensive coordination. While it was not the sole factor in any single victory, it formed part of a broader network of intelligence that strengthened France's strategic capabilities. The transformation was striking. Only a few decades earlier, artists had called it a gigantic black smokestack and a tragic street lamp. They had feared it would symbolize industrial excess and aesthetic decline. Now, that same structure was quietly serving the nation in a time of crisis. Its iron beams, once accused of disfiguring Paris, were now supporting technology that protected it. There is something deeply ironic in that shift. The tower survived not because of emotional attachment, not because of romance, and not because of public affection, at least not initially. It survived because it worked, because it contributed, because it proved indispensable. Over time, the antennas at its summit grew more advanced. As radio technology improved, so did the tower's capacity to transmit and receive signals. It became an integral part of France's communication infrastructure, later supporting radio broadcasting and eventually television transmissions. The very feature that it angered critics, its towering height, ensured its survival. If it had been shorter, it might have been dismantled. If it had been purely decorative, it might have been removed as tastes changed. But because it offered a measurable, practical advantage, it earned its place permanently in the skyline. This chapter of the tower's history reveals something important about progress. Innovation often begins as spectacle, but it endures through relevance. The Eiffel Tower was initially a bold statement of engineering ambition. It became a scientific instrument. Then it evolved into a communication hub. Its identity shifted from exhibition centerpiece to national asset. And as the years passed, public perception shifted alongside its function. What had once been labeled an eyesore gradually became familiar. Familiarity softened criticism. Utility bred acceptance. Acceptance opened the door to admiration. By the time future generations looked up at the tower, few remembered how close it had come to disappearing in 1909. They only saw its elegance against the sky, its lights at night, its silhouette at sunset. But hidden within that silhouette was a quieter story, one of antennas, signals, coded messages, and scientific necessity. The tower that almost vanished became indispensable. It was saved by invisible waves traveling through open air. It was preserved not by sentiment, but by science. And in that transformation, the iron structure proved something remarkable. Beauty may capture attention, but utility secures survival.
In the summer of 1940, Paris held its breath. The city that had once dazzled the world with art, innovation, and light now faced the shadow of war. The German army advanced rapidly across France during the early months of World War II. By June, it was clear that Paris could not be defended without devastating destruction. Rather than allow the capital to become a battlefield, French authorities declared it an open city. German forces entered Paris on June 14, 1940. The occupation began. High above the quiet streets stood the Eiffel Tower, no longer merely a monument of engineering triumph or a beacon of scientific progress. It had become something else entirely, a witness. Before German troops marched beneath its iron legs, a small but powerful act of defiance took place. French workers cut the elevator cables of the tower. The lifts that had once carried millions of visitors towards sweeping views of Paris were deliberately disabled. It was a practical move, but also symbolic. If Adolf Hitler wished to stand at the summit of the tower, he would have to climb the stairs. When Adolf Hitler visited Paris shortly after the occupation began, he toured several iconic sites. Photographs show him posing near landmarks, studying architecture, asserting dominance through presence. The Eiffel Tower appeared in the background of that moment in history, its silhouette unmistakable. But Hitler did not climb to its top. The elevators were not functioning, and the symbolic ascent never happened. Whether out of inconvenience or indifference, he remained below. It was a small detail in the vast tragedy of war, yet it carried meaning. The conqueror of much of Europe did not stand above Paris from its highest point. The Iron Tower, even under occupation, denied him that image. Throughout the occupation, the tower stood silent. A large swastika flag was initially raised on it by German forces, though strong winds reportedly tore the first one, forcing a smaller flag to be installed. The sight of a foreign symbol flying from the structure that had once represented French innovation was painful for many Parisians.
the city moved cautiously under occupation. Curfews, rationing, surveillance. Soldiers marched where tourists once gathered. Yet, the tower endured. It did not collapse. It did not disappear. It remained in place, watching as history unfolded around it. For the people of Paris, its presence became a quiet reminder of continuity. Empires could rise and fall, armies could occupy streets, but the iron framework that had once symbolized progress still pierced the sky. There was a strange stillness to it during those years. No grand expositions, no celebratory fireworks, no bustling international crowds. Instead, the tower stood over a subdued city, its iron beams catching muted sunlight in a time of uncertainty. And yet, even in silence, it carried weight. For decades, it had survived controversy, nearly been dismantled, and proven its value through science and communication. Now, it faced a different test, not of engineering, but of identity. Could a structure remain symbolic when its nation was under occupation? The answer revealed itself gradually. As the war progressed, resistance movements operated quietly across France. Information traveled secretly. Hope flickered, sometimes faint, sometimes bold. The tower, with its history of radio transmission, remained associated with signals and communication. Even when controlled by occupying forces, it retained its deeper identity as a French creation, conceived, built, and preserved through national determination. Then came 1944. Allied forces advanced through Europe, pushing back German control. After the D-Day landings in Normandy in June, liberation moved steadily toward Paris. By August, resistance fighters within the city rose up, and Allied troops approached. The days leading to liberation were tense and uncertain. Fighting broke out in parts of the city. Parisians waited, listening for signs that occupation was ending. The future felt fragile. On August 25, 1944, Paris was officially liberated. In that moment, symbolism returned with powerful clarity. The French flag, the tricolor of blue, white, and red, once again flew from the top of the Eiffel Tower. After years of foreign control, that sight meant more than decoration. It was restoration. Crowds filled the streets, bells rang, emotions overflowed, and above it all, the Iron Tower stood as it had for more than half a century, unchanged in structure, but transformed in meaning. Iron became identity. The same structure that once sparked outrage among artists had now witnessed invasion, occupation, and liberation. It had stood through political shifts, technological revolutions, and global conflict. Its survival was no longer just about engineering success or scientific utility. It had become intertwined with the story of France itself. When people looked at it after 1944, they did not see merely iron rivets and lattice beams. They saw endurance. They saw resilience. They saw a city that had suffered, but not surrendered. The tower's height, once controversial, now symbolized defiance. It still rose above Paris, untouched in its core structure, despite the forces that had marched beneath it. In that vertical line against the sky, many found reassurance that some things remain standing even in the darkest times. War has a way of redefining symbols. Buildings become targets, monuments become statements, and skylines become battlegrounds of meaning. The Eiffel Tower, without firing a single shot, became a quiet participant in that symbolic struggle. It denied a dictator the image of triumph at its summit. It endured the presence of an occupying flag, and It reclaimed its own. By the end of World War II, the tower was no longer simply a marvel of 19th century engineering. It was a witness to 20th century history. It had become part of the emotional landscape of the nation. Long after the soldiers left and reconstruction began, the tower remained, lit again at night, visited again by tourists, photographed again by dreamers. But its story had deepened. It was no longer just about controversy or innovation. It was about survival. It was about a city that refused to disappear. And as the French flag fluttered once more from its peak in 1944, the message was clear. The Iron Giant still belonged to Paris.
Time has a quiet way of changing how we see things. There was a moment in the late 19th century when the Eiffel Tower was described as an insult to Paris. Critics called it industrial, harsh, out of place. Some believed it would forever scar the skyline of a city known for elegance and tradition. It was iron, exposed and unapologetic. It was new in a place that cherished the old. And yet, over the decades, something remarkable happened. The structure did not change dramatically in shape. Its lattice remained the same. Its four legs still curved inward before rising into the sky. Its rivets and beams continued to form the same precise geometry calculated in the 1880s. But the way people felt about it transformed completely. Familiarity softened resistance. Generations grew up with the tower already standing above them. Children sketched it in school books. Postcards carried its silhouette across oceans. Visitors arrived in Paris with one image already in mind, that tall iron figure rising over the Seine. It was no longer an experiment. It was part of the city's identity. Artists began to see it differently. Instead of mocking it, they painted it. Early 20th century painters captured its structure and changing light, fascinated by how its iron frame shifted from shadow to glow at sunrise and sunset. In winter, it appeared crisp and skeletal against pale skies. In summer, it shimmered in golden warmth. The tower became a study of contrast, industrial material meeting delicate atmosphere. Photographers found endless angles, framed between tree branches, reflected in puddles after rain, silhouetted against fiery sunsets. The iron lattice that once seemed severe now appeared intricate and almost lace-like when seen up close. Its geometry felt rhythmic, almost musical. Then, cinema arrived. As film became a dominant art form in the 20th century, directors needed visual shorthand, images that instantly located a story in a specific place. The Eiffel Tower became that shorthand for Paris. A single shot of its silhouette told audiences everything they needed to know: romance, mystery, culture, elegance. In classic French cinema and later in international films, the tower appeared again and again. Lovers met beneath it. Characters contemplated life while gazing at it from balconies. Its presence in the background transformed ordinary scenes into something unmistakably Parisian. It was no longer just architecture, it was atmosphere. The transformation from iron structure to emotional symbol did not happen overnight. It unfolded gradually, almost invisibly. As wars ended and peace returned, as technology advanced and airplanes shrank the world, travel became more accessible. Paris emerged as one of the most desired destinations on Earth, and at the center of that desire stood the tower. Couples traveled across continents to see it in person. They stood beneath its vast arches, looking up at the sky framed by iron beams. Marriage proposals became common at its base, especially at sunset, when the city glowed and the tower's lights began to sparkle. What had once been criticized as cold metal now formed the backdrop for some of the warmest moments in people's lives. The tower's nightly illumination added to its emotional power.
In the early 20th century, lighting technology began to enhance its presence after dark. Later, sparkling light displays turned it into a beacon of celebration. On Bastille Day, fireworks erupted around it, bursting in color against the night sky. The iron lattice, once condemned as harsh and mechanical, became the canvas for light and joy. Tourists climbed its platforms not out of curiosity about engineering, but out of longing for experience. From its heights, they photographed the city, capturing images that would be shared around the world. The act of looking at Paris from above became almost ritualistic, a pilgrimage of perspective. And through it all, the tower stood unchanged in structure, but transformed in meaning. It became the universal symbol of Paris. Not the Louvre, though it houses masterpieces, not Notre Dame, though it carries centuries of history. It was the tower, modern by comparison, once controversial, that became the city's global emblem. Why? Perhaps because it represents more than history. It represents aspiration. Its upward reach suggests ambition. Its open framework suggests possibility. It is not closed or heavy. It is light and transparent, even at enormous scale. It does not hide its structure. It celebrates it. Iron softened into poetry. What was once seen as industrial rigidity now appears delicate at certain angles, almost like metal lace stitched against the sky. The wind passes through it, the light dances across it. Seasons painted differently, golden in summer, silver in winter, dramatic under storm clouds. It adapts without changing. That adaptability allowed it to carry new meanings across generations. In the aftermath of World War II, it symbolized resilience. During times of celebration, it symbolized unity. In popular culture, it symbolized romance. For travelers, it symbolized arrival, proof that they had reached a place long imagined. The tower's journey from controversy to affection reveals something profound about human perception. What once feels disruptive can over time become cherished. What begins as unfamiliar can become essential. Today, millions visit the Eiffel Tower each year. They wait in lines not out of obligation, but anticipation. They take photographs not because they must, but because they want to carry a piece of that view home with them. Its image appears on souvenirs, posters, jewelry, and countless works of art. And yet, if you step back and imagine Paris without it, the skyline feels incomplete. That is perhaps the most remarkable transformation of all. The structure that many once wished to remove has become indispensable. It no longer competes with the city's beauty, it defines it. Standing beneath it now, one rarely thinks about the protests of the 1880s or the near demolition of 1909. Instead, one feels something quieter and more personal, a sense of wonder, of connection, of possibility. The iron remains the same, but in the hearts of those who look up at it, it has become something entirely different. Not just metal, not just engineering, but a dream shaped in iron and lifted toward the sky. Now, after the romance, the wars, the controversy, and the symbolism, it is worth pausing to appreciate something simpler, and perhaps even more astonishing: the raw engineering facts behind the Eiffel Tower. At the moment of its completion in 1889, the tower stood exactly 300 meters tall. That number alone was staggering in the 19th century. No other human-made structure had ever reached such height. It surpassed church spires, monuments, and government buildings. It redefined what was physically possible. Today, with the addition of antennas for radio and television broadcasting, it reaches approximately 324 meters. Yet the essential structure remains the same as it was in the late 1880s. The speed of its construction remains equally impressive. From the start of assembly in January 1887 to its completion in March 1889, the project took just over 2 years. For a structure of that scale, the tallest in the world at the time, this timeline was extraordinary. Modern skyscrapers often take longer even with advanced machinery. The tower was built with 19th century technology, human coordination, and mathematical precision. The total weight of its iron framework is around 7,300 tons. That number sounds massive, and it is, but what makes it remarkable is not just the weight, but how efficiently that weight is distributed. Unlike stone monuments that rely on sheer mass for stability, the Eiffel Tower relies on design. Its open lattice structure reduces wind resistance and unnecessary material. It does not carry more iron than it needs. Every beam has purpose. Approximately 18,000 individual iron pieces were fabricated in workshops before being transported to the construction site. Each piece was designed with millimeter-level accuracy. The components were not randomly adjusted on site. They were pre-calculated to fit together like an enormous mechanical puzzle. This level of precision was possible because of detailed engineering drawings and advanced mathematical planning led by Gustave Eiffel and his team. Holding these thousands of pieces together are approximately 2.5 million rivets. The rivets were heated until red hot, inserted into aligned holes, and then hammered into place by teams of workers. As the metal cooled, it contracted, tightening the joint securely. This method created connections strong enough to endure decades of weather, temperature changes, and wind pressure. It's easy to look at the tower and see simplicity, 4 legs, platforms, a tapering spire, but that apparent simplicity hides extraordinary complexity. The most striking feature of the tower's design is its curved profile. From the ground, the legs sweep inward in a graceful arc before rising more vertically toward the top. That curve is not decorative, it's mathematical. The shape was calculated to respond to wind forces. Wind exerts pressure that increases with height. If the tower had been straight and rigid without curvature, it would have faced uneven stress distribution. Instead, its form follows a curve that balances these forces efficiently. The wider base provides stability, while the gradual narrowing reduces surface area exposed to stronger winds at higher altitudes. Even during powerful storms, the tower does not behave unpredictably. It sways slightly, only a few centimeters at the top under strong wind conditions. This flexibility is intentional. Absolute rigidity would make it more vulnerable to stress. Controlled movement allows it to absorb energy safely. In extreme temperature changes, the metal expands and contracts, causing small shifts in height of several centimeters. These movements are normal, anticipated, and accounted for in the design. What critics once dismissed as ugly industrial metal is in reality an exercise in aerodynamic efficiency. The open lattice structure allows wind to pass through, rather than push against a fully enclosed structure of similar size. The tower's weight, relative to its height, is surprisingly light. If melted down and recast into a solid block, it would occupy only a small footprint compared to its towering presence. There is another detail that deserves admiration: alignment. When the 4 legs were first assembled, hydraulic jacks were used to adjust their position with extraordinary accuracy. Engineers had to ensure that the legs met perfectly at the first platform. Any misalignment at the base would have magnified as the structure rose. Yet the final assembly fit with such precision that only minimal corrections were required. The elevators, a technological marvel at the time, were themselves engineering achievements. Designing lift systems capable of traveling along the curved legs required innovative mechanical solutions. They had to function safely and reliably while following the arc of the tower. This was not simply a matter of vertical shafts. It required coordinated engineering between structural and mechanical teams. Maintenance has also played a role in preserving its genius. The tower is repainted approximately every 7 years to protect it from corrosion. This process requires dozens of workers and thousands of liters of paint. The color itself has changed over time, but the goal remains constant, preserving the iron against the elements. When one examines these details, the tower's brilliance becomes even clearer. It is not merely tall, it is calculated. It is not merely strong, it is efficient. It is not merely iconic, it is engineered with intention at every level. In the late 19th century, building at such height without modern cranes, computerized modeling, or contemporary materials demanded extraordinary foresight. Mathematical equations replaced digital simulations. Careful drafting replaced automated calculations. Human skill replaced robotic assembly. And yet, the result has endured for more than 100 years. The Eiffel Tower stands not only as a cultural symbol, but as proof that mathematics can produce elegance. Its proportions are harmonious because they respond to physics. Its beauty emerges from logic. What critics once perceived as harsh and mechanical is in reality an exercise in aerodynamic efficiency. Engineering precision disguised as simplicity. There are no excessive ornaments carved into its beams, no decorative flourishes masking weakness. Its aesthetic comes from honesty, from revealing how it stands rather than hiding it. Every rivet, every brace, every arch contributes to the whole. In that honesty lies its genius. When we look up at the tower today, it's easy to be moved by emotion, by sunsets, lights, romance, but beneath those feelings lies a deeper admiration. The structure stands because it was designed with intelligence, foresight, and courage. What was once labeled industrial ugliness is now recognized as mathematical elegance. And perhaps that's the most powerful reminder of all. Sometimes the greatest beauty is not carved from stone, but calculated in iron.
There is something quietly powerful about standing beneath the Eiffel Tower today. You look up and it feels inevitable. Of course it is there. Of course Paris would not be Paris without it. The 4 iron legs rise confidently from the Champ de Mars, arching inward before narrowing into a single spire that cuts into the sky. It feels permanent, unquestionable, almost timeless. And yet, it was none of those things in the beginning. The story of the tower teaches something deeper than engineering, taller than statistics, and stronger than iron. It teaches that progress often arrives disguised as discomfort. When the design was first revealed in the 1880s, many saw it not as a triumph, but as a threat. Artists feared it would humiliate the city's beauty. Writers warned it would dominate and distort the skyline. Architects signed petitions demanding it be stopped. The language they used was dramatic, almost wounded. They called it monstrous, industrial, a disaster waiting to happen. In 1887, people actively tried to prevent it from being built. Pause for a moment and imagine that version of Paris, one where the protests succeeded, one where the iron structure was never assembled, one where the skyline remained untouched by its silhouette. It feels impossible now, but at the time, it felt urgent. Innovation has a way of unsettling people. It interrupts familiarity. It challenges identity. Paris was proud of its classical harmony, stone facades, Gothic arches, domes and spires shaped by centuries. Into that carefully composed skyline came a 300-meter iron framework. It did not resemble tradition. It did not attempt to imitate history. It declared something new, and new can be frightening. Progress often looks ugly at first because it does not match our expectations. We are comfortable with what we know. We measure beauty by what we recognize. When something arrives that does not fit the pattern, we resist it. We question it. We sometimes reject it entirely.
The Eiffel Tower did not change in response to criticism. Its curve remained mathematically precise. Its rivets held firm. Its iron beams did not bend to opinion. What changed over time was perception. Decades passed. Generations grew up seeing it not as an intrusion, but as part of the horizon. Wars came and went. Technology advanced. The tower found a new purpose through radio transmission. It survived occupation. It witnessed liberation. Slowly, without dramatic announcements, it moved from controversy to comfort. In 1887, petitions were signed to stop it. In 2026, millions take selfies with it. The contrast is almost poetic. Today, visitors travel from every corner of the world to stand beneath it. They wait in long lines not to protest its existence, but to experience it. Couples embrace beneath its arches. Children tilt their heads back in wonder. At night, when it sparkles with thousands of lights, phones rise in unison to capture the moment. What was once called a disaster became a masterpiece. But here is the crucial truth. The Eiffel Tower itself did not transform into something else. It did not soften its iron into marble. It did not disguise its industrial origins. It remained what it always was, a lattice of precisely calculated metal rising into the sky. The change happened in the hearts of people. Time allowed familiarity to replace fear. Experience replaced speculation. Perspective replaced assumption. And maybe that's the real lesson hidden within its story. Sometimes beauty is not immediate. Sometimes it requires patience. Sometimes it requires courage, not only from those who build, but from those who observe. Gustave Eiffel believed that engineering could be art long before the majority agreed. He believed that mathematics could shape elegance. He defended his vision against public criticism, trusting that the structure's logic would eventually speak for itself. Without that conviction, the tower might never have risen. Without time, it might never have been understood. We often celebrate the finished masterpiece, forgetting the resistance that preceded it. We admire the icon without remembering the doubt. The Eiffel Tower invites us to look deeper. It asks us to remember that greatness is not always welcomed when it first appears. There is something reassuring in that idea, because it means that innovation, whether in architecture, science, arts, or human thought, doesn't need universal approval on day one to matter. It needs integrity, it needs purpose, it needs resilience. Standing beneath the tower today, you might hear laughter in different languages, cameras clicking, guides explaining its history. You might feel the breeze passing through its open framework. You might notice how light changes its color from gold to bronze to deep shadow. And perhaps, if you pause long enough, you'll sense the quiet irony in its existence. This monument of iron, once despised, now represents romance. This structure that nearly faced demolition now defines an entire city. This tragic street lamp now illuminates dreams. The Eiffel Tower stands not merely as a product of 19th century ambition, but as proof that controversy can give birth to greatness, that resistance does not always signal failure, that criticism can accompany brilliance before it is recognized. It reminds us that history is filled with ideas that were once dismissed. It reminds us that change, though uncomfortable, is often necessary. And it reminds us that beauty sometimes requires distance in time, in perspective, in understanding. So the next time you look at the Eiffel Tower, whether in person, in a photograph, or silhouetted against a Parisian sunset, remember this: it almost never existed, and in that fragile beginning lies its greatest strength.